brand new video. We're getting through it. We're literally at the point where we built most of our system, and now we're going to be doing the fluids, the lighting, the rendering, the compositing, and really taking our shot through to final. So I'm excited about this. It's going to be a lot of fun getting through all this stuff, and at the same time we are just at the tip of the iceberg in terms of the other things. As we progress through the next couple of lessons, we're definitely going to be picking up the pace a little bit. I've gotten a few emails from people saying, man, like, you talk really fast. So I'll try and slow it down a little bit. It's the Australian in me, it sometimes comes out. But I'll do my best to pace my words a bit. But yeah, like for me, like I did want to mention that this lesson, again, is kind of like rounding off all the work that we've done so far. We've front-loaded the work that we've been doing, so that way it becomes easier when we need to change things or when we need to adapt. And I really want to mimic what we do in a real feature film environment, like a really real feature film production environment, where basically we want everything to be intelligently and cleanly built and layered upon itself, so that way we're not hacking it together. I think like 15-20 years ago, when I'm working on projects, you tweak one thing, you got to go render it out, but then you got to go and update everything else that you've ever built to reflect that too. Here we're building everything up as a system, so that way it all plugs together, and when we change one value, it affects everything. And it means that when the director comes and says, hey, make the fluid a little bit different, or make it spread out more on the face, you can paint that in and hit a button and everything changes and updates. I remember working on Daybreakers. There's Willem Dafoe, there's a shot of him where his whole face is on fire, and the directors, the Spirit brothers, they were like, hey, like, can we get a little bit more fire here or here? And it was as simple as going to Photoshop, as we've done, and painting where I wanted the fluids to be, where I wanted the fuel to burn, and we could see it in real time. I'd Alt-Tab back into Max, and it would all update in real time, and we could see exactly where in the face the fire would go. I could hit a button, and not only do we have all the heat distortions, the fuel, temperature passes, all the things that came from it, all update, but it meant that it was just so easy to have complete control over what we're doing. And that's typically what I do with everything. We want to make it so it's easy. It's a 5-minute tweak rather than a 1-day tweak to get those results changed. And when we're building something this robust, we want and need to have that control. Okay, so that being said, let's get into this video. So we still have a few videos to go, but obviously so much more still to cover. This is an infinite process that I feel the more time we put into bettering ourselves, the more opportunities we create for ourselves. Nothing replaces hard work, discipline, and dedication, and even putting in 2 hours a week to better ourselves and put our skills up will noticeably impact your opportunities. Throughout this training, you have not only created effects, but also composited, lit, rendered, and integrated your elements and learned to work in a real studio workflow and know how to handle entire shots. On top of this, last video, learning to optimize everything and keep things fast, and how critical that is in production to work the broad strokes approach can allow you to get fast turnarounds and reduce the mistakes and make more time for yourself to finish your shots. I'm throwing as much information at you as I possibly can in such a short amount of time. So imagine what I could do if I had a year with you. And imagine if I got to talk with you regularly every week during that year, and you got to jump into a live chat room dedicated to the specific training you're doing, ask questions in real time and then get them answered, or better yet, a private Facebook group, wiki, forum, all of these things that continue every day to build, grow, and expand. For me, the best experience I've had is getting to do regular live sessions and review your work with the entire live action series class. Whether you log in the morning or night, there's multiple live sessions on those designated days, so no matter what time zone you're in, you can always find one that suits you. Also, talk directly with me as I review your work and answer your questions and offer suggestions on how to improve your work. On top of all these bonuses, special software deals, and other advantages, even global meetups, we're doing one in Paris next year and another in Los Angeles later this year. This is what I call a 360-degree training environment. You don't have to be a part of all of these things. Some do because they're that excited, dedicated, and passionate, but others find out the right things that work for them, whether it's jumping into a live chat just for a quick question to get answered, or hanging out on Facebook occasionally. Whatever works best for your needs. You have so much access to myself and to everyone else. Like I said, in this training, we're a family, and we're always growing, Some of us are just starting our careers out now, others are going to switch careers into visual effects. Some of the students are working at ILM, Weta, and other big studios with 20 years experience. Before training was ever announced publicly, everyone in the FXTD mentorship had been discussing this course for over a year, and has been a group effort designing and discussing every aspect as it's grown from concept to reality. Because of this, everyone in the mentorship has had the chance to sign up ahead of time so they could secure their spot. Amazingly, almost everybody has decided to continue their journey into the course, and the downside is, because of this, there aren't that many positions available to you guys in the public. So if you want to take the next step and not miss out on this opportunity to be part of the journey together over the next 12 months, this is your moment to do something. So be ready to jump on this opportunity to get out of your comfort zone and do something big that you can look back on as one of those moments that changed your life, impacted your career, when you look back even 3 months after joining us in the live action series. Okay, so it's fun time. We're gonna do the liquids. This is the hero effect. This is something that I'm excited about because we get to do some really cool stuff, and also something that's brand new. As I'm recording this, it's literally, I forget how old it is. It's not, it's a month or something. I forget. It's not been around for that long, and this is Bifrost from Maya, and Bifrost is actually Naiad originally, and it was acquired by Autodesk a couple of years back. I think it was 2016. I can't remember anymore. I know the guys who developed it. They made a killing actually selling it to Autodesk, but yeah. So yeah, and it's still being developed. Like, I feel like the Max implementation is very early. So I think I mentioned this in the last video, but like yeah, basically the solver itself is great, so I don't want you to think that like, oh, Alan says very early or very basic right now, that therefore it sucks. It's not the case. It's the implementation. So the solver is great. You can do amazing fluids. It's just, I'd love to get more control out of it. I'd love it to be node based like Naiad was, and Bifrost. So it'll get there. It's literally update 3 for Max. So it's it's a hot fix. It's an update for Max. It's not a whole new version. So I imagine when 2019 rocks up, we're gonna have a whole other thing. So, and I am kind of tempted to, yeah, talk to Autodesk about some of the implementation. I don't know, like, it just comes down to time. But yeah, so anyway, what I want to do is we go to our character. Sorry, I'm kind of talking and trying to do this at the same time and running on very little sleep this entire week. So with our character and his Michael Jackson gloves, we got our character here, and we're going to use the whole setup that we've built basically to generate all the liquids coming out of the pores and everything else. And that's the cool thing, is that we actually have the character controls, and these were physically displacing in, and I kind of regret being so excessive. In fact, I have an idea. Okay, so I just thought of something really cool we could cover, which I'm pretty sure if you haven't used wrap deformers before, this could be really fun to do. And I don't know, we'll see, but basically what we've got going on here is we got the hands, and they don't have any displacement right now, but we do have displacement on the face. But the whole idea of this is that if we have physical displacement, it means the liquid is going to get created inside. And when we render this out, we do have V-ray displacement, like micropoly displacement, building up all the shaders. So they're physically at render time going in. So I think it'd be really cool for us to have the actual fluids, fume and everything else, do the same thing. That way we're going to get some really cool results from this. So I do want to do all this all simultaneously, but I figure we should probably deal with the hands first, and that way we just, we're not going to have that hiccup that we had last lesson, whereas I wanted to keep it hands down, just focusing on one thing, focusing on the results rather than getting bogged down having to replicate it throughout the scene and kind of keep that going. So I like how we've done things, but moving forward we'll obviously do the hands and the face together. So basically, here's the thing. I want to use this to emit our fluid, but on top of that, you know, I want this displacement, which is going to be fine, but I also want to have this physically displace in. So we have like little pockets, like holes where the liquid can build up. Okay, so right now these are obviously open meshes, and what I think would be cool is to close out the mesh. Like we have a, I guess, yeah, we put a cap on that. So going back for a second, the only thing is, yeah, this is the only tricky thing about this is the fact that we don't you know, we can't transfer the mapping over or anything, but I can do something cool which could work out really well here. So let's dive right into let me hide all this stuff, but yeah, let's just get right into doing the liquid simulations. So initially, if we get our character this guy here, he has displacement on his face, and over time that displacement digs in. So let's just hide these hands for a second. So the displacement digs in. What I want to do is I want to create another set of particles that are going to be specifically inside of here. Now, just a heads up, technically you could emit fluids from a map with max fluids, but the texture projection doesn't seem to be working right now, so I'm going to opt to use particles instead. So we can go into our current workflow that we have in here, and we can base it off of this to an extent, but I think it's just better to replicate the setup really quickly to mimic this. It's not that much work. We've done it enough times at this point that it's going to be really straightforward to do. So going in here, I'm just going to go to the baked, yeah, it would be the baked texture for the face. Yeah, this guy. Drag it on there, display in viewport. So we have that map set up. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in and turn Turbo Smooth off, and that way we're dealing with just the low res object. And I mean, we could use the high res one, just for now. I figure it might be a little bit quicker, because what I want to do next is I want to bake out the particles and do all that. Now, we have this set up here, and I want to do something similar, but we're going to do it really quick, and it's going to be really simple. Whoops, don't do that. So let's just make sure effects controls is active, and I'm just going to create an empty flow. I'll make this 100% viewport, max out the memory limit, and I'm just going to do a birth texture, and we'll rename this to face. And I'm simply going to set this up for this one moment. Let's just do like 150, 150. Purely just, I want to get the distribution right, and then we'll do it longer than that. So all I'm going to do is click initialize parameters, pick this object, and let's set the separation fairly low, like 0.13, and again 150, 150, and then yeah, I think everything else is fine. I might lower my whiteness just so it spreads out a little bit more and fast approximation. Okay, now I'll let that cache out, and let's link this up. So I might need to go to 150 for it to appear. All I'm doing is I'm just looking to make sure that the distribution, let me just get around this. Yeah, the distribution is wide enough. And I think that's fine. I mean, we could go ultra detailed, but I don't want to go too insane, so let's just try 0.09. So I think that's tight enough. Now, I'm going to turn that off, And we'll come back to that in a moment. I'm going to do another birth texture. Obviously this one's going to be the hand. Again, 150. And we'll set this to 150. Separate. Again, I'll try like 0.1. Fast approximation. 60. And we'll add in this hand geometry. I'll let that calculate. So that's pretty fine. I might actually go less because I want to be pretty careful about this. I don't want to go too insane, so we'll try 0.12. Now I did that kind of quick, but we've done it enough times that it's pretty obvious at this point. Now rather than using lock bonds and all this other stuff, all I'm going to do is say 120 to 300 and do the same thing for this one, 120 to 300. Same deal in here, 120, 300. Animated. And we should be able to do a bit of a surface offset. I need to refresh that for that to appear. Yeah, surface offset. I'm going to go out on a limb and just say like 0.3 to 0.5. All I'm doing is I'm offsetting it to be slightly above the hands. In fact, let's just do a 0.1, 0.15. The main thing is that I'm emitting every single frame. Before, we always just did a snapshot of one frame, but now we're going to do it for the entire time. So this might take a moment, but I'm going to run it, and I'm going to do it for the other birth texture, but let's just do it really quick, and we'll see the result. Okay, so now we can see that the textures have been created on top. As we can see here, they're locked onto the surface, so there's no lock bond or anything like that. They're just emitting every single frame, which is great, so it's all baked into it automatically. Now I'm going to do the same with the face. Just going to go initialize parameters and go 120, 300, animated. We'll do a slight offset, 0.1, 0.15, and all we're doing is we're pushing it above the surface normal, so it's just going to sit slightly above it. And the reason for that is I want to emit from there later. So I just figured that way we can use the shape as a collision object, and what we can have instead is have the particle sitting slightly above the surface. And now, as we can see, all the particles are emitting on and they're sticking to the character. It's a little bit sluggish, unfortunately, but that's just part of the process. So, turn these both on. And I'm just going to quickly set this up. Now, there's a few different things we could do here. Basically, what we're doing with this is we're creating a shape that's going to emit inside of the cracks in the hands, in the face, and we use that to generate liquid. Max Fluids is still relatively new. There's one or two little quirks. One is that you are meant to be able to emit from texture maps, at least right now. It doesn't seem to be working, it seems to be broken. And so the workaround for that is to generate a mesh that we emit as a volume. Now, the most efficient way to do this would be to use blob mesh. Blob mesh is extremely slow. I love Frost from ThinkBox, but it's a commercial plugin. So if you have it, you can use that and use that to generate the mesh, and that way it's doing a level set, so it's one mesh rather than generating lots and lots and lots of volumes. But what we're going to do is we're just going to create a shape here. For now, I'm just going to do like a 20-side sphere, and we'll display this as geometry. I'll hold shift and duplicate this over as an instance. And we'll just look at the face for now. So obviously let's bring the size of these down a little bit. And so that's growing on the face. and continues to expand out. Now, like I said, this is why I was very careful not to use too many particles. I still feel like that's kind of too much. But we can see that we're generating all these mesh shapes. We could play around with using, you know, something similar like a pyramid or a cube, and it's obviously going to be less polys, but it's not really about that. It's just about more the redraw. So for now, we'll just stick with the 20 sides. And the whole idea is that this is growing out all over the face. And we can still bake this out and everything. It's just, it is a little slow. Anyway, I'm going to set my scale to 1. And that's just that way we just have a solid number. What I will do next is I'm going to add in a scale. And I'm going to set this to like 45, something like that. So the reason is because I'd rather control the scale. I'm also instancing this, but I'd rather control the scale through the scale operator. Okay, so what I'm going to do next, I'll explain why in a moment, but what I'm going to do next is I'm going to just add a cache disk, and this will allow us to cache it out. We'll set this to view end render, we'll max out the memory limit, select the file, and then finally we'll set post cache operators, and then add, we get scale 4 and 5, so 4 and 5. Okay, so we add them in, and it means that now if we wanted to, once these are cached, we can still go back and change the scale of these, which is kind of handy. Okay, so now I'm just going to let this cache, and now we've got this all set up. So I'll run a quick preview of this. Okay, so here we can see the texture's all growing on. Everything looks good. Now, one thing that I am noticing is there's a little bit of the geometry kind of popping, and that's not the particles, that's the actual geometry. And so you can see it, there's a little bit, where is it? Yeah, right there on the forehead. So the only thing about that is we can ignore it. I just guarantee what's going to happen is it's going to cause like liquid to get flicked up in the air, and I kind of don't mind it just because it's going to give it character. So it's one of those things, if we wanted to fix that, there's a few different ways. I could use flex, or I could relax it more, or I could go into the particles and basically tell them if it were to move that quick to do a speed test, and the speed test would then send it to a lock bond, or yeah, just there's a few different ways basically. So I don't mind it though. I'm going to keep it just because I guarantee you're going to see it later when we actually work with it, and it's good to know all this now so you can kind of predict it later on. However, yeah, it's, you know, for me I think it actually will kind of make it look a bit more interesting. So keeping in mind that none of this is going to be visible, the geometry, it's just going to be the liquid reacting to it. So now that we have that, we've got the particles emitting on the surface. That was really quick, we did it really instantly, and we have it all cached out. Unfortunately, we can't do a point cache or anything on this because the topology is changing all the time. Again, if you have ThinkBox, like ThinkBox software, you've got XMesh, and XMesh would allow you to do that, to cache it all out, which is really fast and really easy to use. You could also try Alembic as one other option as well. So if we did want to set that up, then we would just need to create another mesher. So let's do a couple things really quick. Get my PF source. I'm just going to rename this to PFS fluids emission, and then we'll select it in here. So PFS fluids emission. In the top viewport here, I'm just going to cheat and type in mesher to create one, but basically just compound objects mesher. The reason I'm doing that is just because that way it's centered. So I'm going to pick and then choose PFS fluids emission. Alright, so that's set up. Finally, let's just drop it into meshes. We'll rename this to measure fluids emission. And I turn my fluid off for a moment, so I'll turn that back on. Alright, and let's just go export, selected, Alembic ABC, and just save that out. Okay, so would you just do the Ogawa? HDF5 is an older approach. Export particle shape as mesh. We got a few different options here, but we're just going to click OK. Finally, I'm just going to switch this to Mesher. So this is the active group. I'm going to go import, bring in our Alembic, and we'll just call this ABC fluids emission. Okay. Now we can turn off our particles. We don't need the... Sorry, I just need to fix the name of this. It's bothering me. Yeah, we don't need the mesher or anything like that. What we do need is just our Alembic. Now, the cool thing about this is that this is a geocache. And so we're not dealing with the particles and everything else. It's actually quite fast. Okay, so that's our approach. The only downside of doing something like this is if we wanted to go back and make an adjustment to our system here, we would need to re-export it back out. And this kind of breaks the whole procedural approach that we have. The same way when we had to bake out the textures. I don't like doing stuff like that because it does disconnect us from having a system where I can just change tweak a setting and have everything get affected. But the cool thing is that this is all baked out. Okay, so we're almost there. We've been going through a lot. The final stages of this that I want to do is we just want to get our geometry all set up and get ready to start emitting all of our fluids. So hiding the Alembic for a second, let's just look at this stuff. So a couple of requirements we have is that we've got an emission mesh, but I actually want to have a collision mesh. And right now we have this for the hands, but it's not really going to work too well because it's an open mesh. So what I want to do, a little bit more tweaking here. Hopefully you're learning a lot though, because we are covering a lot throughout this, but I'm going to go back to our character main, and I basically just want to build some open-ended hands for this. Okay, so we got the hands there and all that, but let's actually get this and work with this here. So what I'm going to do is I want to get this mesh and use as a collision shape, but I also want to affect the hand here because there's no, it doesn't go in like it does with the other hand. Okay, so I've got the body and we've got the hand shape. Let's hide everything else, and I'm going to go into this guy and just put a poly select. I'm just going to select everything, deselect the body. I just want to double check. Okay, so maybe all I want to do is, we'll not worry about that. All I wanted to do is I was going to get rid of the eyeballs and inside of the mouth because it wasn't really necessary, but it's fine. So we have the hand, and then we have the hand mesh. If we look at the hand mesh, it has all this indentation. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to temporarily, actually, here, I'm just going to temporarily turn the displace off on the hand. Then, let's go to frame 120. And I'm going to apply a skin wrap to this. And skin wrap is essentially a wrap deformer. Okay, so like in Maya, things like that, you would have a wrap deformer. So we can apply a skin wrap to this. And what a skin wrap is, it's basically a wrap deformer if you're familiar with Maya, where you can use objects to deform other surfaces. So in this case, with the displace turned off, I can go and add that hand texture. And we can choose the influence and all that kind of stuff. For now, I'm going to try just leaving it at default settings. Let's just see what we get. And I'm going to turn displace back on. Now, because I had it off and it was all aligned, now I turn it back on, and we can see that the geometry is now deforming the other object. So I can hide that for a moment. We can see that the hand is now deforming inward. So as this continues to move in, you can see that the hand's now deforming. Obviously this isn't tessellated like the other one, so that might be a thing if we really wanted. I could put like a turbo smooth temporarily on there. I would need to reassign the skin wrap, but that would give us the detail that we need. So it's up to you. I'm not too fussed about having extra detail here. If we really wanted, I could just select this, pick, again, choose ignore back facing, but pick the hand. I think it might be easier just to spray can this. It's always tricky. I might actually turn point cache off for a second. I think that's going to be a bit easier. Deselect everything else, and then we'll pick this hand here, so ignore back facing back on. Lasso. So if we really wanted, we could do that, and then I'm going to do a mesh smooth rather than a turbo smooth. So mesh smooth, turn off apply to whole mesh, and then poly select, and we just added more geometry around there basically. So as you can see, it's just doing in that one section. Turn point cache back on, go to the beginning, turn that displace back off, and now we do a skin wrap. And I'm more just pointing out that you can do this. You don't need to necessarily tessellate the geometry. I'm going to turn displace back on, hide it. But if we wanted to, that would just give us a bit more geometry, and the hand's still gonna go in and do its thing. Okay, so that's basically how we could take care of that. I would just be careful with this to make sure it's just the hand, because we are getting some. Yeah, I think that's fine, because you can always put a fall off. Yeah, essentially I just want to make sure that this is quite limited, so I think that's fine. Okay, now if we wanted to, we could point cache this back out to make it faster, but I'm not too concerned. It's not that slow, but it definitely, having a big mesh like this is definitely doing a lot for it. In fact, maybe I will, only because, and this is an important thing, we have all of this geometry here. So what I'm thinking is I wouldn't mind doing a poly select, because we're about to get into doing our fluid simulation now. So none of this is visible below the camera. Okay, so doing a poly select, let's just try to get as much geo as we can. I'm not going to, be really critical about it, but just trying to get as much as I can there. Do a delete mesh, another poly select, and then cap everything out just to make it a closed mesh. Okay. I might go actually back to poly select. And I'll just do it down here. I think it will just deform a little bit nicer. Okay, So with that being done, I'm going to point cache this out purely because I want to just have this geometry here as the collision. It's going to be less to calculate than having the whole mesh. Like the legs, we don't need to worry about the liquid messing with that, so I'm just going to do point cache. And I'm just going to call this collision upper body. And I'm also going to name the character collision upper body. So char collision upper body, and hit record. Okay, so once that's done, just going through, everything looks good, so I'm just going to cut, cut, collapse, and then paste. And that way we get that lightning fast refresh again. So there is a slight chance we might still want the original mesh for rendering and stuff like that. So just be aware of that, like although I did collapse this all down, I might ask that we bring in the original model and yeah, and basically use that for rendering as a holdout. The reason I didn't do it this time, and I'm just being completely honest here because it happens, I was just experiencing a bit of crashiness when I was trying to duplicate the object, so I just felt like we just modify the original object. So I'm just mentioning that because there is a chance I might say load up a previous version and import the character back in just for rendering sake. Okay, so you know we'll see how we go with it all, but I just thought I'd mention that ahead of time. Okay, but at this point we're in a good place. We've done a lot of work, and you know we've got the particle emission happening on the mesh. You can see how it's all actually lining up perfectly now with that, and I don't see it too much up here though. Oh yeah, the reason for that is pretty easy. Obviously, one more time, I'm just going to delete all of this because we have our head. So I think it's that guy. Just trying to see which one's the one that deforms in. Should be this one here, is the character bait texture, which is what I thought it was. Okay, cool. So yeah, now we got all this kind of deforming in, doing its thing. So this is going to work really well for what we need. So before we do the cap holes, let's go one step further, and that is we also have under character texture baked, we've got this head here that deforms in as well. So we have the turbo smooth on there, and that deforms in. So let's do that as well. Let's just, because we'll end up baking all this out. So I'm going to get this guy, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do a poly select, select the upper head, and then we'll do the same thing. I'll do a mesh smooth. Turn off apply to whole mesh. Okay, so that's going to subdivide that up. And if we need to, we can just click ISO line display, turn that off, and we can see the subdivs are there. They're all calculated, it's just it keeps it clean by not showing it. But the whole point is that we do that. I'm going to go frame 120, add the skin wrap. Before we go any further, going back to the hand texture, just turning displace off, and then in the skin wrap, adding that mesh. Okay. So just, you can see down here the progress. With the head, there's a bit more geometry than the other one, so it's just taking one moment. Okay, now going back to our character big texture, we can turn displace back on, and that will affect it. So if we jump ahead a few frames, we can see the deformations happening on both. So now we have the hands. They look a little bit wonky, but we have the hands, we have the head, all that doing its thing. Now one more poly select just to deselect everything. That's the only reason it's there. Then I'm going to do cap holes, just so it's a closed mesh, because this is going to be our collision mesh. Okay. And finally, I'm just going to click point cache, save this out, and I actually just ran this a second ago just as a test. So collision upper body, and actually, yeah, I'm going to call the character collision upper body as well, and hit record. Okay, now that that's done, just temporarily, I'm going to do two things really quick. I'm going to just select all of this and turn it off just for one moment. Clone this, because we still want the original object. Now, if we want, we can clone this object, so we just have a backup of that if we ever want to roll backwards. Or what we can do, yeah, I mean, I think that's what I'm going to do just really quickly. I'm going to just turn it all off, right click, clone, copy, and I'm just going to call this backup. This is purely just so that way we have the original mesh, because technically we need to render out something with the holdout geometry, just because we have the displacement and because the hands don't have the UVs. That's just something that we have to take into consideration. So turning this all back on, I'm just going to get the point cache, cut it, collapse it as we've done before, paste it back in, and that way we have the full-blown body mesh, which has all of the displacement, everything on it, all is looking good, and you know, it's scrubbing extremely interactively. So, you know, we've done a lot. Like, this has been a process, you know, creating all this stuff, but now we're at a point where everything is looking pretty cool, and it's just a matter of now doing our fluid simulation. And you know, we've got the geo to do that. We also have that alembic mesher, which is happening inside of it, and you can see there's a bit of jitteriness, which, you know, hopefully isn't that bigger issue. It's more to do with redraw, so like it's not jittering that much, but there is a little bit of actual physical jitter in there, just from the relax fighting the displacement. Ultimately, to avoid that, we could have just softened out our maps a little bit. But anyway, this is looking cool. We can see it's all animating and growing, and we can use that to drive the fluid. So now we're going to move into creating the fluid simulation based on all of this setup. So it's definitely been a process, and this is part of being a TD. You've got to do all this work because this gives us the complete control to now be able to do things neatly. Otherwise, before, you know, if you just kind of jump into it and hack it around, you're going to get hackish results. So this is definitely going to work out really, really well. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. As I said earlier, we've been building up until this point. Next video, we're going to be getting into all the fluids. We're going to be creating all the liquid and building all that up, and we'll be doing a lot of complicated shader stuff as we get into the lighting and the rendering. And it's really cool. We even have the liquids kind of creating pseudo wet maps where as they go near things, they begin to affect it as well. So not only do we have areas that we hand painted to decay, but as the liquid progresses and floods over everything, it's also going to change the shaders as well. So again, we're building this up, making it very procedural. Okay, so that's what I love about this is that, you know, as I mentioned earlier, we're going through and doing a real workflow that you would do in production. I think that's so critical. I'm really proud of that in the live action series, that we are creating real shots. We're approaching it the way that we do in real production. And that means that all these students, all these people who are either already working in the industry or they're getting their first job at big studios like Scanline and Weta, it's really cool to see them all going in there and literally being able to sit down in a chair and start working instead of it being a gamble. And for me, running a studio, I know that gamble because so many times I want to hire someone, but I'm not sure whether or not it's the right risk to do because they know how to make cool effects, but that's such a small part of it. If you're not able to finish a shot, then in a way you're worthless to everyone else because it means that you can't take your shots all the way to completion. It means that other people need to pick it up. And if you can prove that, if you can have shots on your reel saying, hey, this is what I did, I took a shot all the way from the beginning all the way through to completion, it's so critical to show that proof being able to finish shots and take them all the way through to final. Okay, so that's what we're doing in these lessons, and this means that you can finish the shot, show it off on your reel, and be able to demonstrate that you can sit down in a production environment and be able to get results right away. Throughout LAS, like the live action series, that's the thing. I feel like everyone, usually within probably the first 1.5 modules into it, 1.5 terms into it, you've already got enough stuff on your reel that you can go get a job. You know, it isn't about going all the way through and, you know, a year later. It's like literally within a month or two, you'll have enough stuff that you can use it to get work, and a lot of people have. And I find it really rewarding because I think it was Mark Terriot, we're in Paris last year. We were talking about this. He works at ILM and Image Engine on a lot of big productions like Star Wars, Force Awakens, stuff like that. And we were talking about all it takes is one good shot. If that's all you have on your reel, you know, quality over quantity is such a critical thing that if you can demonstrate one good thing, that's at least enough to pique their interest. You'd rather make people want to see more than feel like they've seen too much. Okay, and but by having multiple shots and showing that you can do all these different things, it becomes not only will you get the job, but more negotiation tactic of, look, I can do all this. Here's proof. Here's entire sequences I've done all by myself. I'm mimicking the same production environment that you do every single day, and that's the same environment that a lot of the big studios like Scanline and everywhere else typically do. So if you can do what they do, then there's no hesitation or risk, as I mentioned earlier, when hiring someone, because you know that you can sit down today and start doing work in their pipeline, in their workflow, in the stuff that they do day to day, in all the different genres, all by yourself. So you can confidently do that. Then there's no risk, there's no hesitation. You can sit down and start doing work, and that makes you a really powerful asset. But like one thing I loved about Blur, and a lot of employees back at Blur Studio back in like 2004, 2005 went to ILM, and ILM was nabbing people up like crazy because here's ILM, who's an amazing and very proven studio, obviously, but typically a lot of people come in with disciplines. In other words, you come in, you have your one thing that you do, and a lot of people there are multidisciplined, they're amazing, but the typical workflow that started in the early 90s, late 80s was that you learn your place. And here you have Blur, which not only at the time was 55%, I think, foreigners. So in other words, you get people outside the US who typically come from smaller countries where you have to do everything. You need to render, you need to light, you need to animate, composite, do all the things to take a shot through from start to finish, like what we're doing now. That made them really, really powerful in terms of what they can accomplish. Going to Blur, it meant that everyone at Blur was able to do whatever it took, like whatever it takes for you to get a shot done. You'll comp your own stuff, you'll model stuff, you'll animate, you'll do whatever it takes. And for ILM, when a lot of the people went to ILM back in 2004, that was really interesting just because what ended up happening was that all of these people were just coming in that weren't single disciplined. They could do it all, you know, and it meant that if you could render, light, and finish a shot all on your own, that would put you up here. And yeah, it made every single person stand out, and it became a bit of a currency having that, you know, Blur background. It meant that you got the stamp of approval. You are a hard worker, you can get a lot done, and it definitely makes you a really effective artist. So I mention that again because I think that having the multidiscipline, being able to do it all, as we're doing, we will be doing, lighting, shading, rendering, compositing, that makes us become that next level artist. It means that we can take a shot through from the beginning to end, and that positions us in a much better light. If you're going in as an effects artist or a lighting TD, whatever you might be doing, but you can do all these other things, how does that make you look? It means that not only when things are a bit quieter can you do more, you can jump into a different department, but on top of that, you've got the foresight of knowing that your work is going to comp. Therefore, you can communicate to a compositor and say, well, what elements do you need? Do you need multi-mask? Do you need Z-depth? Do you need me to render out the beauty and break it up into elements? Do you need to render it deep? What do you need from me so that way I can get your job easier for you and make sure that you've got everything that you need to do your job. At the same time, you're able to communicate backwards as well and talk to artists saying like, look, for me to be an effects artist and do my job, if we're destroying a building, I need closed surfaces. I need to make sure that it gets through an STL check in Max, which is the stereolithography, I believe it is the stereolithography check where basically it's just making sure that it doesn't have any leaks or anything like that. Same thing you would use for 3D printing, things like that. For destruction, you need that because you need closed surfaces. You don't want to have any holes and things that are going to cause problems. So if you're able to communicate to modelers, to animators, to everyone else, like what your needs are, knowing their role, and being able to say, hey, you know what, like if you point cache it out, that way I don't need all your envelopes and all your bones and everything that's going to bog me down. It means that I can just have a PC, like point cache mesh, and I'm good to go, or just fire it out to Limbic. If you can keep the UVs so that way I can modify them to get my maps done, kind of like what we're doing here. All of these things become really powerful because the more you understand the entire pipeline, the better you can work. And on top of that, it helps you when it's time to move up to being a CG supervisor or a visual effects supervisor, because you need to understand the entire department. You need to understand the entire production pipeline. And so the more you know, the more it's going to position you in a place that you can move up much quicker. So again, that's what we do in the live action series. We push all this knowledge in and we try to cover as much to get us to a point where, whether we're just entering into the industry or whether we're looking to be a visual effects supervisor or a CG supervisor, we understand the entire production process and we're able to be that one man or one guy, girl production team where we can do it all ourselves if we wanted to. And I think that also makes you a better film developer if you wanted to make short films or whatever it was that you wanted to do too. So I figured I'd add that in, just mention that, because again, I'm so proud of what we've accomplished there, all the students and what we've done. And again, that's why all the training we're doing right now, I'm trying to push that on you too. So next lesson, we get into all the fluids, we do a lot of cool stuff. I'm psyched about it, it's gonna be awesome. I want to have my little rant just because honestly, everything I'm seeing at the moment, all the work that everyone's been doing, it looks fantastic. I hope to see yours. If you haven't shared it with me yet, shoot me an email or else post on my Facebook, leave a comment, however you want to do it. But I would love to see everyone's work and how you're progressing through it. Okay, so check your inbox. More great stuff to come. There's a few bonus videos and guides and other things I'm going to be sharing with you as well. So, like I said, it's Christmas. I'm going to be giving out as much as I can. I want to give back to the industry as much as I can as well. So keep an eye on your inbox and I'll have more great stuff soon.